Greetings, dear listener. Subscribe to the channel so as not to miss new scary stories and support me with a like. Enjoy listening.
It was one of those spring April evenings when nature gives a pleasant opportunity to walk along the city streets without warm outer clothing. I thoughtlessly wandered along the path of a large city park, paved with yellow paving slabs, slowly avoiding strolling couples and noisy groups of cheerfully noisy young people. After a whole week of tedious work in the office summing up the quarterly results and the constant importunity of employees, I was finally alone with myself. People in the park didn't care about me, and no one bothered me with stupid questions. Subordinates often take advantage of my kindness and outward calm, but who would know how much I have to endure? The sun, hiding behind the tops of the pine trees, flooded the entire pedestrian path with orange rays, creating a certain unreality of perception and, at the same time, bringing a pleasant tranquility. Busy with thoughts about how in a week I would celebrate my 40th birthday with friends, I unnoticed myself and wandered into the farthest corner of the park. Passers-by almost never came here, but there were a couple of clean wooden benches, on one of which I sat down and took out my phone. It was necessary to call my grandfather to inquire about his health. For a moment I closed my eyes against the blinding pre-sunset sunlight, and when I opened my eyes again, I saw an old woman in front of me. Somehow, imperceptibly, she grabbed me by the sleeve of my favorite striped sweater. I probably need some change, I decided, and mechanically reached into my pocket with my free hand. Beggars are not uncommon in our city. Some of them can really be tossed coins or small bills, but others smell of deceit, alcohol, and unwillingness to work a kilometer away. This last category made me very angry. Although I understood intellectually that even among the right beggars there could be good actors. Once I saw such a beggar whose working day was over. He stood on his amputated leg, artfully tucked in for greater pity, and pouring the cash from compassionate passers-by into a bag. Whistling something, hurried to the car parked around the corner. Judging by her decent appearance, the granny with her gray hair tied up in a bun did not belong to any of the listed categories. Taking my hand out of my pocket, I stared at her questioningly. "You look lonely, young man," she said in an unexpectedly cheerful voice for her age. I didn't think that older people, and she looked to be well over 70, could have such a ringing and melodic voice. "I want to offer you to take on a guest," she continued, without letting go of my sleeve. "For a while, it is extremely useful and brings good luck. This is something new." I couldn't hold back my laughter. In fact, I was expecting calls from some Jehovah's Witnesses sectarians or similar fanatics, or simply a request to talk to an old man. "This happened to me too. It brings good luck," she repeated mysteriously. "What makes you think that I'm lonely?" I asked, glancing at the wedding ring on my left ring finger. I pulled out the sleeve of my sweater, a little angry at such unceremonious treatment of me. "This," I pointed at the wedding ring, "that doesn't mean I live alone. And if so, then why did the guest surrender to me? You don't need to deceive me, Alexander. You live in a large apartment with your cat Georgie. After your wife left you, and you couldn't have children," she suddenly said sternly in a cold voice, looking at me with her colorless, watery eyes in such a way that I was taken aback. I couldn't figure out where she got so much information about me from. Even close friends did not know that the ex-wife could not have children for medical reasons. "Who told you about this?" I mumbled, completely confused, and rubbing my unexpectedly sweaty forehead. "It doesn't matter. You must take a guest. He lives under the table. You don't need to feed him. He only needs a part of your consciousness, sometimes, and then you will pass it on to someone." Now her frosty, creaky voice pierced me with needles of unpleasant sensations to the very depths of my soul. She took out from her gray coat what looked like a small ball of black thread. Here I had a completely fair suspicion that I was dealing with a crazy woman, and it was useless and even dangerous to argue with such people. True, this did not change the strange fact that she knew so much about me. "And if I agree, will you leave me alone?" I sighed tiredly. "Let's bring your guest here. Let him live with me." It must be that if someone heard our conversation and saw an adult man who took a ball of thread as his guest, we would both be considered crazy. Well, really, I shouldn't have fought with the stubborn old lady. It was easier to take these threads and throw them in the trash on the way to the house, so that she wouldn't see. That evening, such a decision seemed to be the best way out of this ridiculous situation. She put the guest in my jeans pocket and, smiling at one corner of her mouth, silently left. For a minute her hunched, hobbling figure was still visible, until she disappeared around the turn of the path towards the attractions that had not been operating for a long time. Dusk comes quickly on spring evenings. It took me at least half an hour to get to my high-rise building on foot. By that time, street lights were already lit everywhere. Looking around to see if this strange woman was following me, I stopped near the trash can to throw away the ball, but there was nothing in the pocket. Only something seemed to slightly prick my hand. Apparently, I lost it along the way, I decided, although I felt the object in my pocket all the way. It's hard not to feel a 5-centimeter ball in tight-fitting jeans. However, he disappeared. Well, to hell with it. In the apartment I was greeted by the heartbreaking meow of the eternally hungry Georgie. Shifting heavily from paw to paw, his ex-wife had fattened him almost to the shape of a ball. He demanded to go to the bowl, having first sniffed me diligently, also a tradition when I come from the street. The fresh air had a soporific effect on me. I barely dragged myself to bed and immediately fell asleep. Right in clothes. It was necessary to rest for all the lack of sleep of the working week. I woke up in the middle of the night with a cat staring at me. He has this lousy habit. He will sit next to the bed at night and hypnotize me while I'm sleeping, just like he used to do with his wife. What's going on in his cat's brain at this time, only God knows. However, the feeling is unpleasant. I went to the kitchen to drink milk from the refrigerator and splash it for the cat, and when I returned and went to bed, I realized that Georgie and I were no longer alone. Someone was under my old oak table. I brought it from the village, an old, shabby, but damn strong table with convenient drawers. After applying black varnish, it acquired a noble, even antique look. I placed my work laptop and all my work-related papers on it, and stuffed a music amplifier into the dark footwell. Fortunately, there was plenty of space there. Now there, someone was sitting there. In the weak light of the night lamp, a vague silhouette was visible. My gaze caught on the sharp ears, hairs of fur, and yellow eyes that flashed for a moment. 3 times larger than cats. The same round ones. A rolling wave of fear chained me to the bed. My mind told me to turn on the light and figure out what had gotten into my apartment, but fear pressed me to the bed like an unbearable weight. A tense silence hung in the room. My nerves were taut like strings, and then, suddenly, something began to gurgle under the table. I have never heard such an unpleasant and unnatural sound. A dull, uneven clatter, as if from a poorly adjusted engine, poured into my head in waves, filling it first with just a disgusting cold, and then with completely panicky horror. The cat rushed headlong into the kitchen and fell silent, a traitor. How long this lasted is unknown. I don't remember how, but I still fell asleep. Or maybe I just passed out from fear. When I woke up, I remembered with a shudder the events of the night. He grabbed a heavy stool in his hand and, plucking up courage, looked under the table. No one. Only the LED of the sound amplifier blinking cheerfully in standby mode, which I never turn off. Maybe it was my imagination. After drinking a giant mug of coffee and finally calming down, it was possible to go for a week's supply of groceries and an exercise bike, the purchase of which had been put off for 6 months. I was incredibly lucky this Saturday. On the way to the hypermarket, out of habit, I decided to take a shortcut and slipped under a brick. In a remote courtyard, to my amazement, a patrol of traffic cops was grazing, having already stopped some violator in an old jiggly car. One policeman was writing a report to the driver who had committed a fine, and the second, seeing me, decisively walked across my brand new silver Ford. He was already preparing to wave his staff and deprive me of a considerable part of my hard-earned money, when suddenly he froze like a statue. His eyes looked at one point, past me. He seemed like a wax figure. I calmly drove past, and already in the rearview mirror, I saw the patrolman flinch and unsteadily walk back to the patrol car. This was just the beginning of a lucky streak. At the sports store, they told me that I was their 100,000th visitor and gave me the coveted sports equipment for free along with their platinum card for a 50% discount. In the supermarket, for a full cart of groceries, I gave a handful of change that's what the seller wanted. She said that today she wanted to give someone such a gift and that someone turned out to be me. I paid for utilities at the ATM and, returning to the car, found a heavy wallet stuffed with $5,000 bills. My window was slightly open. Okay, they could have stolen something, but planted money. I hid it in the glove compartment and, with the thought that the owner of the wallet might show up at any moment, I decided not to touch it for now. What happened next was even more interesting. I went to the cinema for free, after which two dazzlingly beautiful girls handed me their phone numbers in turn and offered to spend the next weekend with them. My luck ran out when I got home. Georgie disappeared. I checked all the corners and his favorite spots. It is unclear where the 5-kilogram animal could have disappeared in the apartment on the 13th floor. The balcony was securely closed, and the cat certainly could not fall out of there. The night outside the windows had already taken over when I stopped my useless searches. Upset, I went to bed, deciding in the morning to interview the neighbors and children in the yard. And again I heard this terrible bubbling noise from under the table. My nightmare last night wasn't just a nightmare after all. The same fleeting gleam of yellow eyes, full of hatred. The same nasty sounds and falling into deep sleep. Just before that, I managed to notice the severed head of my cat lying right in the middle of the room. But I spent the whole evening looking for him. I'm not blind. The new morning greeted me with the ringing of my mobile phone. A young female voice joyfully announced to me that I had won a tidy sum from the mobile network operator, and this was not a joke. I chuckled nervously. Luck began again. The room was pristinely clean. There were no gruesome remains of the cat. Perhaps I was imagining it again. And naturally, there is no one under the table. The doorbell rang. A man in a suit presented me with a box of elite cognac and left, giving me a friendly pat on the shoulder. Lost in thought, I uncorked one bottle and went out onto the balcony with it. Damn it, with my current luck, I could drink it all and drive around the city all day. Even stop and pester traffic cops. I'm lucky anyway, but the cat is gone. No problem, let's start a new one. I even laughed hysterically, although I felt that something was going wrong. I couldn't forget my pet so easily. However, I was no longer worried about the cat. The thought flashed through my mind that now I don't even need to go to work. You don't have to leave the apartment at all. My good mood disappeared when I saw a familiar old lady from the park. She stood under the balcony, not far from my Ford, and looked at me. From the 13th floor balcony. The person is quite recognizable. I have never complained about my eyesight. The meaning of what was happening dimly began to dawn on me. Hey, wait, I shouted to her. I'll come down to you now. My scream had the opposite effect, and the grandmother slowly dragged herself away from my house. I rushed to the elevator, which, as luck would have it, did not appear for a long time. Of course, by the time I got down, she had already disappeared. She probably came to watch the pet at work. He kicked the wheel of his car in anger. The Ford squealed its alarm indignantly. An ambulance flew into the yard with the piercing sound of a siren. A couple of doctors jumped out of it, and the doctors ran to my entrance. I'm behind them. I felt in my gut that this somehow concerned me. Which apartment are you going to? Already in the elevator, I asked a young guy in a blue doctor's coat. In 112, a man has a heart attack there, the guy answered in a cheerful voice. The girl doctor was examining her nails at this time, not paying attention to our conversation. Is this at Fetka's, or what? I turned cold, realizing that we were talking about my only bosom friend. Fyodor Mikhailovich Potapov, 38 years old, had heart complaints at night, but they called us only 10 minutes ago. The doctor read on the screen of his smartphone, which he hastily took out of his bag. Relative, a neighbor, from 113. His friend, I squeezed out. The elevator finally crawled up to our floor, and the ambulance doctors began ringing the doorbell. Half an hour later, I already knew that Fedor, a first-class boxer who had not been ill for a long time, died of a heart attack. I was shocked. I dragged myself to my place for a drink and to calm my nerves. It's a pity there wasn't a cat that you could sit on your lap and pet. Poor George. There was a registered letter on the desk. It's unclear how it could have gotten into a locked apartment, and I only went out once today chasing an old lady, and I completely locked the door. Regular registered letter. In these cases I receive tax notices or fines for violating traffic rules, but not at this time. The return address was local, from our head office. Due to successful and fruitful work, my grateful management tripled my salary, and brilliant prospects await you in further cooperation with our company Neostars. The letter read. This line stuck in my head and I couldn't get it out of my head. Cooperation. I was always called the smart guy, mainly because I was excellent at comparing and contrasting. quickly summing up statistics and identifying shortcomings in the organization. I didn't have to try too hard to compare the events of the last 2 days. It became scary. This was an unusual fear. A lingering inner fear arose as soon as I realized that my luck was turning out badly for those who were dear to me. Who's next? I asked myself out loud, surprised by the lifelessness of my voice. Relatives, ex-wife, just acquaintances. Tacking to yourself is a bad omen. The thought arose to see a psychiatrist and immediately disappeared. Registration in a mental hospital means the collapse of your entire career. They will definitely ask you to leave work. And who will believe me? I wouldn't believe it myself, that's for sure. I walked around the apartment in circles. Thoughts rushed around in my head, interfering with each other. Should I call a priest to drive this devilry out of the house? Yes. These fat bellies in robes driving premium foreign cars have no more holiness than robbers. At least they don't hide behind faith. I even laughed at these thoughts. It's funny, but the laugh I made sounded more like a nervous giggle. You can definitely go off the rails this way. I spent the whole day in the apartment, believing that the more luck I get, the more disaster it could turn out to be for those I know. I didn't answer the phone or the door. I didn't check my work email on my laptop. I didn't even go near the windows. No luck, no death. This logic was naive, simple, but I couldn't come up with anything else. I waited for the night with horror, although the horror came in the evening. The head of the NeoStars branch received a large monetary reward from the local budget for the development of entrepreneurship in our city. The announcer of the local TV channel broadcast in a voice full of enthusiasm from a plasma panel that I didn't turn on. This nasty thing has found a way to convey my luck to me, and at night someone will pay for it mortally. Today was the same quiet evening as when I met this damned old woman. The weather these days seems to have frozen in one state. No, you can't wait for the night. I flew out of the house like a bullet and rushed to the park. There was little chance of finding the grandmother, but for some reason the confidence sank into my head that this was exactly what I needed to do. If an old woman lives nearby, then the park is a place for her to walk and search for idiots like me. A large kitchen knife lay in the pocket of my windbreaker as a last resort if she did not agree to take this abomination back. Halfway to the park I laughed evilly. It dawned on me that little chance of meeting this old woman simply did not exist for me now. Just like the very concept of little chance. I will definitely meet her, and I won't even look. I'll just come to the bench at the end of the park, sit and wait. And I certainly won't hand over the guest to anyone, as she wanted. 2 minutes of waiting was enough. You're not a fool. I heard a familiar voice. My God, she has looked at least 20 years younger since we met. In the previously completely gray hair, sparse but clearly dark hairs appeared. Some of the wrinkles on my face have smoothed out. Now a strong 50-year-old woman stood in front of my bench. Only the cold gaze of the colorless eyes was the same as 2 days ago. So you're going to stare? She asked sharply. Her voice was irritated. The former politeness had disappeared somewhere. Of course, she was unhappy. Perhaps she was not even going to go to the park today, but I had to be lucky. Please pick up your guest. You said that I could hand it over whenever I wanted. I tried to be extremely polite. My intuition told me that I clearly shouldn't have been rude to her. No. The woman cursed dirtily and stuck out a disgusting tongue covered with a yellow coating with black blisters. She probably expected me to get scared and run away. Well, yes, she attacked the wrong one. Take it, I repeated quietly but confidently. You yourself agreed. You can only take him away voluntarily, but I don't want to. She squealed throughout the park. Her face was distorted. Everything human disappeared from it. One continuous mask of hatred. However, at least she hid her disgusting tongue. If you don't take it away, I will dream every day that you will burn in fire. I smiled coldly, amazed at my confidence. And I, if you noticed, have been damn lucky lately. I don't need luck's that price. Besides, if you could control the guest, you would never give it to me. You will pay for this, she hissed, extending her gnarled hand towards me. No, that won't work. You first promise that you won't take revenge on me, and will return everything as it was before. I pushed away the outstretched hand. She fell silent for a couple of moments, studying my face, apparently looking for emotions to see if I'm bluffing. But I wasn't bluffing, not even in my thoughts. You can't bring back what happened. Your cad and friend Fyodor are dead, but you can stop this, she muttered. rolling her eyes terribly, so that only the whites were visible. You will even remain in the small financial advantage that you have received over these days. That's the way it will be. But I don't measure people with money, I nodded. And the creepy old woman touched my jacket, fishing out a familiar ball of thread from my pocket. Again, for a moment there was a feeling of a slight prick. But he could also become rich and gain power. The old woman hissed, counting on my greed. Her face again became a network of deep wrinkles and lost significant weight. No. Look for another client, I snapped harshly. Instead of answering, she disappeared into thin air, like in cheap horror films. Her figure became covered with small ripples, then turned pale and disappeared.
Until recently, trams traveled around our city. A cheap, environmentally friendly form of transport, but they were canceled. The rails were dismantled and private buses were launched instead of trams. The city government obliged drivers to transport pensioners, students, and school children for free. But all this was only in words. Almost every day I had to get into arguments with drivers. I was told that there were social buses for me. Yeah, they walked at hourly intervals. Students like me made it difficult for drivers to earn money. In the end, I got tired of the extra hassle, and I began to get to school by transport and began to return home on foot. This is useful, and you will save your nerves, and you will also save money. I got home through the outskirts of the city, where almost no one walks. Losing myself in my thoughts, I began to feel even better. Walking was truly calming. I walked like this for a whole week and only recently began to notice something on the way home that I had never noticed. In our city, there is an abandoned, unfinished sports complex, and behind it there is an empty area that was designated for a stadium many years ago. But one evening I noticed that this territory was no longer so empty. There was a fence, and behind it there were rusty carousels, a Ferris wheel, where several booths were missing. There was a racetrack, a trailer with distorting mirrors, and a trailer called the Panic Room. It was an abandoned amusement park. There was a lopsided sign hanging at the entrance. "We are no longer open. Thank you for visiting our park." Where did he come from here? I remember when I was small, there was a similar park in our city, but in a completely different place. And then it was closed and it disappeared forever. Were the old attractions moved behind the unfinished sports complex? But why were all these structures left assembled? This is weird. I stood there, looked at the abandoned park for a bit, and moved on. What could be interesting about attractions that have been broken for a long time? I probably wouldn't look at the strange park again. But the next evening he caught my attention again. Something has changed. The attractions have become a little newer or something. I walked up to the fence, began to look at the carousel. It was still piled on its side and crumpled in places. The Ferris wheel was still missing a few booths, but the rust had disappeared from the metal. The cars, the room of laughter, and the room of fear, as if someone had painted them. Funny and scary faces looked fresher now. Someone tried to restore it all. How much did they manage to accomplish in just one day, and where are the workers? I didn't notice anyone around. It was just me, alone. As strange as it may sound, the next evening, returning from school, all I could think about was the abandoned park. I hurried to see if anything had changed there. This time my expectations were justified. The lopsided structures became straighter, the missing parts returned to their places. It wasn't exactly a new park, but it looked serviceable, and I can't believe what I'm seeing. There were no signs of renovation on the rides, no fresh paint. It looked like the place had gone back in time to a time before the park had aged or fallen into disrepair. For just a second, the lights on the rides lit up. The carousel and wheel moved over the park. A melody rang out in 2 notes, and then everything went dark again. I blinked in surprise and looked around to see who could have turned on the electricity. The park was empty, and I stomped out of there, not intending to linger there any longer. The next time I was in that place was only after the weekend, and it was a shock to me that the old amusement park was working again. Hundreds of lights were burning there. A wheel was spinning slowly. A children's carousel with horses was spinning. Music was playing, which was supposed to attract guests, but there was no one there, neither visitors nor workers. And who thought of making a park in such a remote place? Fascinated by the spectacle, I went to the entrance. I don't know why I wanted to go there. I was already at the cash register when suddenly a red-haired boy ran out of the arch and almost knocked me off my feet. "Help! Help!" he screamed like crazy. "What happened to you?" I asked. The boy was struggling as if in a fever, feeling his freckled face, looking at his hands. "Don't you see how I've been distorted? I have crooked arms, crooked legs, my face. Don't you see? There are damned mirrors, they disfigured me." The boy ran away somewhere and kept shouting, "Help! Help me!" Sick child, I thought. To be honest, I even felt a little creepy from all this, and I went home.
In the 70s, an amusement park was built in my city, and a lot of people came to its grand opening. On this joyful day for all the townspeople, the first, but not the last, tragedy happened. The first victims of the park were a couple in love riding on a Russian swing, or, as it is commonly called, a boat. During the next ascent, the swing fell off the crossbar, interrupting the lives of 3 people at once. The young man died after falling overboard and falling under another boat involved, which, while rocking, decapitated him. The girl was pushed out later, causing her to crash on the asphalt. Her lung was torn apart by broken ribs, causing streams of blood to flow from her mouth as she exhaled. After 30 minutes of waiting for an ambulance, the girl lost consciousness. Her heart rate almost disappeared. People who had previously tried not to touch her for fear of aggravating the condition could no longer wait. One of those present began to massage the heart, but without calculating his strength, he broke his ribs even more, which provoked a puncture of the second lung and heart. Immediately after this, the girl began to have convulsions. Bloody foam came out of her mouth. Agony began. The third person killed by a strange accident was the owner of an amusement park. He was standing not far from the swing, accepting the gratitude of visitors, when a broken boat fell on top of him. The crushed body pulled out from under her was a bloody mess. In the 70s, an amusement park was built in my city, and a lot of people came to its grand opening. On this joyful day for all the townspeople, the first, but not the last, tragedy occurred. The first victims of the park were a couple in love riding on a Russian swing, or, as it is commonly called, a boat. During the next ascent, the swing fell off the crossbar, interrupting the lives of 3 people at once. The young man died after falling overboard and falling under another boat involved, which, while rocking, decapitated him. The girl was pushed out later, causing her to crash on the asphalt. Her lung was torn apart by broken ribs, causing streams of blood to flow from her mouth as she exhaled. After 30 minutes of waiting for an ambulance, the girl lost consciousness. Her heart rate almost disappeared. People who had previously tried not to touch her for fear of aggravating the condition could no longer wait. One of those present began to massage the heart, but without calculating his strength, he broke his ribs even more, which provoked a puncture of the second lung and heart. Immediately after this, the girl began to have convulsions. Bloody foam came out of her mouth. Agony began. The third person killed by a strange accident was the owner of an amusement park. He was standing not far from the swing, accepting the gratitude of visitors, when a broken boat fell on top of him. The crushed body pulled out from under her was a bloody mess.